February 27th, 2026, President Trump sent a message to troops, quote, "Operation Epic Fury is approved. No aborts. Good luck." The very next day, the US launches an attack on Tehran, the capital of Iran. They began with cyber attacks to cripple Iran's communication networks, then mobilized over 100 aircrafts with the sole goal of causing as much damage as possible to the military forces of Iran. Iran attempts to strike back with missiles of their own, but most attempts are shot down by US air defense systems. 4 American soldiers and 555 Iranians of both military and civilian affiliations lost their lives during the attack, including the supreme leader of Iran. Additionally, according to General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, USS General Ford, an aircraft carrier, has been deployed to join the USS Abraham Lincoln to aid in furthering their attacks. This sudden attack prompts the question, why is America attacking Iran? According to President Trump's State of the Union address given on February 24th, quote, "For decades it had been the policy of the United States never to allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon," end quote. It seems that, at first glance, the US is attacking Iran to prevent them from achieving nuclear capabilities. However, just before this, he talks about how they just obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities during Operation Midnight Hammer back in June. So when Trump gave a statement saying, quote, "They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program," end quote. According to President Trump, in under a year, Iran has already reached a point in their nuclear development to warrant a full-on assault on their capital. The reason behind this assumption is that Iran has a large uranium reserve that they're unwilling to part with, uranium being a key component in nuclear weapons. During mediated talks between the two nations on February 26th, the US sought to strip Iran of their uranium reserves, but Iran declined, stating intentions to use the uranium for energy production. The US then offered to provide free nuclear fuel to Iran in exchange for their uranium. Iran declined. The US perceived their desire to keep their uranium reserves as a threat to national security, which led to the attacks on February 28th. However, the uranium Iran possessed was at only 60% purity, falling short of the 90% purity required for nuclear weapons. The US speculated that Iran would enrich their uranium for military use, but due to the US bombing all of Iran's enrichment centers during Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran currently lacks the capability to do so. That begs the question, why is the US so worried about Iran achieving nuclear capabilities in the first place, and why does that worry make them consider Iran to be such a great threat with nuclear capabilities? To understand why the US is so worried about Iran, we first have to understand the history of US and Iranian relations. Dating as far back as 1979, former US President Jimmy Carter imposed sanctions against Iran in November of 1979 after the Muslim student followers of the Imam's Line, a radical student group, invaded the US embassy in Tehran and took hostages. Following this hostage crisis, the US implemented sanctions against trade with Iran, freezing $8.1 billion USD worth of Iranian assets. These sanctions were only lifted when the Algiers Accord were signed in 1981, trading the lifting of sanctions for the safe return of the hostages. Shortly after this, during the Reagan presidency in 1983, the US placed an arms embargo on Iran, which was followed by embargoes on all Iranian goods and services in 1987, in response to Iran starting the tanker war, where Iran attacked all foreign ships who entered within 40 miles of their coast. Iran also refused UN's call for a ceasefire for the war between Iran and Iraq during 1981 through 1988. These embargoes were followed by strict sanctions from former President Bill Clinton in 1995. President Clinton completely prohibited all trade with Iran in response to Iran's support for groups the US considered to be terrorist groups. These sanctions and embargoes eventually all culminated in the passing of the Iran and Libya Sanctions Act in 1996, where Bill Clinton imposed major penalties on any business who invests more than $20 million in Iran and the development of their petroleum resources. These sanctions were only eased just a little when in 1997, Iranian reformist Mohammad Khatami was elected president of Iran in 1997, Khatami sought to further progressiveness in Iran, which garnered favor with the US. After the end of his presidency, in 2004, Ahmadinejad was next in line for president of Iran. Upon entering office in 2005, he halted the suspension of uranium enrichment that Iran agreed to do with several nations. After Iran started enriching their uranium again, the US pressed the UN to establish sanctions against Iran's nuclear program in an attempt to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons. In June of the same year, US President George W. Bush issued an executive order to freeze all assets belonging to anyone connected with Iran's nuclear program. The UN followed with the adoption of Resolution 1737, which called for Iran to completely halt their nuclear program and also establish sanctions on any nation who attempts to aid Iran's program. Iran responded by condemning the resolution, claiming their nuclear program is only for peaceful, energy-related use. However, if that were true, they would not need to enrich their uranium to a level beyond what is required for nuclear energy use. After this, the US continued to maintain sanctions on Iran, completely stunting their economy by limiting their trade. To understand why the US is so worried about Iran, we first have to understand the history of US and Middle East relations. American President Woodrow Wilson endorsed Britain's Balfour Declaration in 1917, which endorsed the idea of a Jewish state to be made in Palestine. His endorsement came from lobbying by prominent Zionists. This endorsement by the US, along with the aftermath of the Holocaust, led to the UN coming up with a partition plan for Palestine in 1947. This plan described the separation of Palestine into separate states, some for the Arabs that were already there, and some for the Jewish to live in after the Holocaust. 1 year after the partition plan was proposed, Zionist leader Ben-Gurion declared the State of Israel as a home place for Jewish people. Following this, America was the very first nation to recognize the State of Israel. This action of endorsing Israel angered the surrounding Arabic nations that were already there. The US being involved in Middle Eastern conflicts led to resentment from those in the region they did not support. This built up resentment from surrounding nations in the Middle East, eventually culminated in the form of Al-Qaeda. September 11th of 2001, a terrorist group known as Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 planes. They flew 2 of them into the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon, and the 4th plane was brought down by the passengers before any major damage could be done. This attack claimed 3,000 lives and left a permanent impression on all who even witnessed it on the news. This attack marked the first time in modern American history where they suffered a serious attack on their own soil from a foreign terrorist group. Al-Qaeda attacked the Twin Towers because they detested the heavy presence of the US in the Middle East. More specifically, they did not agree with the US aligning with Israel in the Israeli-Palestine conflict. They believed that the US involvement was preventing any sovereign government to be established in the Middle East. This sentiment was shared by several nations in the Middle East, and since Al-Qaeda showed the US that the Middle East may retaliate for US involvement in their politics, the US has had their eyes locked on them ever since then. In summary, Middle Eastern nations are not happy with the US interfering with the politics of their region, and since they have proven themselves to be capable threats, the US is always making sure they can't become strong enough to attack them. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Like if you found the video informative, and subscribe to catch the next one. I hope you have a great rest of your day.